So this is my fall semester field and food experience at the Dickinson Research Center, or DRC. So DRC Community Garden facilities is a place for students to grow and harvest various crops and conduct their own research on them. The purpose of our garden project was to get hands-on experience growing different crops and learning the different steps needed for a successful harvest. Dr. Mahmood and Dr. Eppelfarmer were our guides in this project, overseeing the process. So this is a picture I took of our initial bed where we started from. So we started by splitting into groups for our garden project. We used spades and rakes to prepare the soil and the seeds. For the seeds, this is important to ensure the soil has been turned to allow nutrients from the bottom to reach the surface so the plant can get adequate nutrients during germination and growing. So weeds and soil preparation. We weeded the plots by hand picking all of the weeds, and using tools to get rid of any roots that were left behind. Weed management is critical because if they're left behind, they can suffocate the desired plants, leaving no room for them to grow and taking away all of their nutrients. For soil preparation, we turned the soil with rakes and made sure that it was moist enough for the seeds. So my group for the plant and crop selection, we chose beets and radishes because that was what interested us the most. Other groups planted crops such as peas and lettuce, and there was more as well. Our steps that we took, we started by making sure the soil was damp to provide moisture for the seeds. We also made trenches for the seeds in the soil. That way we could kind of plant them in rows. Then we placed each seed by hand in these trenches and then covered them by hand. And then lastly, we watered the plots to make sure that they had plenty of water for the plants to grow. We noticed the first sign of emergence was by visit 3. The radishes germinated a little sooner than that, so probably about visit 2. The radishes were kind of starting to come up, but full germination was by visit 3. And then here's some pictures to kind of show that. So, and then as far as mulching goes, so there was already like hay placed on the different beds to keep the moisture in. So that was already done when we got there. And then as far as using organic fertilizers in there had already been plants like planted in our different beds before we got there. So like they used them like the previous year. So by us turning the soil, we got to use the organic matter that was already in there. And then for pest control, pest monitoring, there was already like a fence around the perimeter of the property to keep out like deer and groundhogs. And then we were kind of going into like the colder season or like the colder months of the semester. So we really didn't have to worry about bugs too much either. So that was nice. Agricultural operations refers to the management practices that help keep the soil loose and friable and also permit the retention of moisture as well as adding organic fertilizers, as I stated before. And then here were some pictures from that day. Again, our radishes look really good in here. The beets, not so much. So growth monitoring and then challenges that we faced. Over the weeks, we observed the plants and noticed that the radishes were doing significantly better than the beets. Their leaves were significantly bigger. We even tried to harvest them at this point to see if they were ready, but we ultimately decided that they could use a little longer in the soil. So we think that maybe the beets needed more time once harvested. This may have also been due to the change in temperature and weather. Some days were super hot and dry. That's a typo. While other days were super cold and wet. For these issues, we left the plants in the soil where they could be warmer and watered regularly just to kind of give them a little bit more time. And then initial harvesting. So we harvested the crops when they were mature. Harvested crops are mature plants that have been gathered from the field for sale, consumption, production, and storage. We harvested our crops, the beets and radishes, and by pulling gently on the leaves because we wanted the tubers under the soil. Once they were exposed and free of the soil, we cleaned them off and then weighed them. The beets were not very big, but the radishes did really good. A little too good. So the beets weighed about 1.5 pounds altogether. The radishes weighed about 8 3/4 pounds, which is quite a bit. And here's a picture to show that. Yeah, our radishes were huge. And our beets were really tiny. So reflection, I learned how to plant a garden in a raised bed. I learned skills like turning the soil to incorporate the nutrients, making sure there was enough water and moisture for the seeds, making sure there was no pests or weeds. And then we also learned how to harvest our crops. This experience helped give a real world scenario for some of the agronomic crop topics discussed in class, such as using different planting methods and organic matter that was already in the soil from previous harvested plants. If I had to do it over again, though, I would have harvested the radishes earlier, because whenever we harvested them, when we did, they were so big, there really wasn't any flavor, because like I said, we left them in too long. And then I would have harvested the beets later, because they needed a lot more time. Conclusion. So my experience here was overall productive and a good learning experience outside of the classroom. We learned different planting and harvesting techniques for our crops. We also learned how to maintain a garden and grow the plants, making sure there was adequate water, no weeds, no pests to interfere with the growing process. And then the DRC allowed us to use their facilities to carry out our projects and learn the different aspects of growing crops. And then I also appreciated the staff and instructors for taking care of our garden plots on the days that we were not out there, because we were only out there, I think, 5 days out of the semester. And I also appreciated them sharing their knowledge with us. And then here are my references. I used some websites to help make this slideshow, but ultimately Dr. Jessica Epifarmer and then Dr. Mahmood gave a lot of their insight for this. So yeah.